Welcome to video 26. In this video, I'm going to revise the concept of usability evaluation, and particularly, I want to focus on usability testings, which you will be conducting with your users in order to refine your prototype. Remember, when you conduct your usability testing, you've got to make sure that you also collect the data and also collect documentation of your testing itself, because you'll be required to write a report in the evaluation report, which is due in early week 10. So it is very important to remember that when we do any design work at all, that we must involve evaluation, because designing without evaluating is actually a waste of time. That's because you don't know whether your design works, whether your users actually want the kind of designs that you've designed for, and many other reasons. So make sure that you test and test early. So the earlier you test, the more ability for you to be able to find out what's wrong and actually to tailor it to the kind of right product that people would want. Now, for this subject, we're talking about 3 different types of evaluation. Number 1, we're talking about expert heuristics walkthrough, and then we're going to be looking at usability testing. And then finally, which is something that's new and not covered in this video lecture, but the next one, which is actually about user experience evaluation itself. Now, I want to remind you that expert heuristics walkthrough and usability testing have already been taught to you. You've originally learned that in Fundamentals of Interaction Design. So what I'm doing here is actually to go through it quite quickly and to cover the main points, so that when you do conduct your usability testing, you are reminded about the main things that you need to do and that you conduct it as properly as possible. So what is expert heuristic inspections or expert heuristics walkthrough? Well, this is not conducted with users, but actually a trained usability expert is the one that's conducting the evaluation, okay, for himself or herself. So this person knows the usability heuristics really well. They choose a set of heuristics that they want to use for this particular evaluation. Most commonly, nuisance heuristics are used. Now, what they do is that they inspect or they walk through the system as an expert, not as a user, to identify potential issues that goes against a set of the heuristics that they have in mind. So basically what they do is they step through the prototype from the beginning and then look through each of the frames and screens that you've designed. And then because they know exactly what good usability heuristics are, they'll be able to find problems. Okay, so that's why you want to use an experts here. And the experts will note down the issues, and then they will say, okay, for this screen, these are some of the issues, and this will be the recommended changes. They are often conducted before usability evaluations with users. That's because the experts would then be able to get rid of a lot of the usability issues, so that when the users come and you conduct usability testings with them, there'll be less problem for them to find. Again, you can conduct expert heuristic inspections after you've implemented changes, after you've conducted your user testing. As I said before, in any heuristics evaluation, whether it's an expert heuristics or whether you're doing usability testing with users, you can use any heuristics that have been well known in terms of to help you to find out and to ascertain usability in your system. The most famous one and the most popular one that's being used is actually the Nielsen's 10 usability heuristics for user interface design. Now, I wanted to include the full title because I want to remind you that these heuristics were designed specifically to look at user interface design. So if you're looking at something that doesn't involve an interface, so these heuristics are not so appropriate. Okay. Now, the reason why this is one of the most popular one is because this has been the one that's been used by most people. Most people have actually thought through it. It seems to be very usable and been able to cover a lot of the problems that people usually find. Okay, and there's been a lot of documentation about these usability heuristics, and so there's a good standard to it, and that's why we continue to use it. But your job is you need to understand clearly what each of the heuristics mean, because when you do your usability testing with your users, you should be able to find out why and match it with particular heuristics, which heuristics the user has a problem with in terms of design. So when you're conducting usability evaluation with users, they are often conducted in a very controlled environment, as the pictures here show. Sometimes, it's conducted not only in a room, but it's also a one-way glass where observers sit on the other side with a microphone that can hear and everything, as well as record the whole thing. Okay, and in the room itself, you can one of the testers will sit next to a user and will basically be taking notes as well. So before you conduct your usability testing with your users, you must look at your prototype and decide, well, where am I in my prototype and what do I want to evaluate? Okay, it will definitely depend on what stage your prototype is as well. So if your prototype has a certain type of functions already in the interface itself, then you can evaluate those functions. But if it doesn't have it, then there's no point evaluating it. So then what you need to do also, then you need to create scenarios, okay? And each of the scenarios would describe tasks the participant will perform while interacting with the prototype system during the evaluation. So what it means is that you have to write the scenarios before the testing. Okay, you need to look at what functions you have and what possible scenarios that people can have to use your prototype given the functions that it has at the moment. And the best thing is to do is to write each scenario onto separate cards. So basically you're giving one scenario at a time to the user to read and to try and use the prototype to complete. You need to recruit users for the testing, of course, probably between 4 to 5 users. And you want to organize 3 testers to be in charge per session as well. So tester 1 is the person that will be interacting the most with the participant. Okay, they'll be the one that's welcoming the participant and explaining the task to the participant. Test 2 is the tester who will be in the same room, sometimes in a one-way mirror room, but that person will be taking notes and collecting data about what's going on. And the third person will be not interacting, and T2 doesn't interact as well. T3 also doesn't interact, but would basically be filming or helping T2 to take notes and also look at completion time of the task and maybe even observe things like body language. So what are these different scenarios that you want to write and what do they look like? Well, the scenarios should be very, very simple. It should be about the task that you want to perform, that the user wants to perform with your prototype itself. So for instance, you walk into the train and it's about to depart. You want to set a reminder to be notified to alight at the right train station. So that's just one scenario that you will write onto a card, and hopefully that's what your prototype can has screens that allow your users to be able to do that, and you'll give the user that card. Okay, also before your usability evaluation sessions, you need to create usually what we call session scripts. So it's a script that T1 usually use to greet, to say hello, to get the person to sit down and to basically introduce the task and explain the task, explain how it's going to run the task. Basically, it's a script that is repeatable. So with the first participant, second participant, and all the way to the 5th participant. Okay, so that's why you call it a script, so that you don't deviate much between participants. Of course, there's going to be some changes when a participant might ask you a question, might ask T1 a questions because they're confused about something, but more or less the session scripts are the one that the T1 needs to follow. So what happens during the usability evaluation or usability testing session? So what you need to do is to test one user at a time, of course. So you go to your waiting room, you invite the first one in. T1 welcomes the participant, explains the aim of the evaluation. So this is using the session script, okay? But it's very important to explain that the aim is not to evaluate the person's abilities, but the system's design, because a lot of times people get a bit scared because they think that it is them that's being evaluated. Really, it's not. It's about saying to them that you're the expert, you are the user, but we want to test whether our system is good or not. So T1 then gives the user the first scenario when the person is seated in front of the prototype and asks them to read it. And if they have any questions to ask T1, and then T1 would maybe clarify the scenario to the person. And then T1 would commence the test by asking the user to complete the task described in a scenario by using the prototype. What's very important here is to encourage the user to speak aloud while they're completing the task. Okay? T3 can help note down how long it took the person to complete the task. T1, if they feel that they are not getting enough thinking aloud or speaking aloud from the participant, could ask clarifications. Why did you do that? If they didn't explain or say it aloud why they did certain things. Okay. Sometimes they might be quiet and see how somebody, if a person is struggling, they will not need to intervene, they shouldn't intervene until you can see that they definitely have no way to move forward until something is done. So you might then help them to say, okay, you need to click that button in order to move forward. So you do one scenario and then you do the next scenario. So repeat with different scenarios until all scenarios have been tested with one user. Then you collate the result. After one user, you collate the results and you think about what went wrong, which usability heuristics were there was a problem with that particular heuristics, and also work out how critical the issue is. Now in red, what is really helpful for me is actually to iterate between users. That means if after the first user you found that there were a number of tasks that were actually very badly designed, and what you need to do and what you should do is actually fix them in your prototype before you get number 2 in. Because you know that number 2 will find the same problems. So what you want to do is that after the first one, if you fix it or iterate your prototype, then with number 2 you'll have less problems to find, but they might find something else. And then you iterate after the second one. So by the time you get to the third, fourth, and fifth, there'll be much less issues with the prototype. Okay, and maybe that also opens up more ability to find other problems. Okay, so once you finish the whole evaluation session, you need to sit down together as a team and think about how you can actually implement the actual change to improve your prototype. Of course, you need to document the changes. Now, how do you report your evaluation findings? There are spreadsheets that is available to you on Canvas itself, but what you need to basically note down is actually what the scenario is and what particular task within that scenario itself, and what the issue is, what is the relevant heuristic, is it heuristic 3 or heuristic 3 and heuristic 6, and what the severity is. Severity means how bad is the problem. Now, we rank the severity by 3 major ranking. The first one's critical, that's the worst, and then major, minor. Okay. Now, how do we work out what is critical, what is major, or what is minor? Well, the severity of the usability problem is actually a combination of 3 different things. How often did it occur? Okay, is it common or is it rare? The more often it occurred, the more critical it is. The impact means how difficult it is when that problem occurred. Did it stop people from moving forward? Absolutely. Okay, then that's critical. If people were able to take a little bit of time and then found the answer, be able to move forward, then it's a major. But if it's just a slight kind of confusion but quickly recovered, then that's a minor. Okay? And the persistence of the problem, is it a one-time problem that users can overcome once they know about it, or will users repeatedly be bothered by the problem? So if it keeps popping up, then also keeps lingering in your prototype, then it's also a critical problem that you need to fix. Okay. And finally, with all testings and with all methods that we use, there are always limitations, and you've got to be aware of the limitations of usability testing. Usability testing is really great for finding out how people think, what they think about your interface elements, whether they can actually work out how to do stuff step by step. But the problem is that the limitation of a user testing with usability testing here is that it's often done in a controlled environment, usually done in a room that's very quiet. Why? Because we want to be able to observe clearly what people are doing. We also want to be able to hear them speak, and we want to be able to interact with the user without any noise and confusion and distraction to the user itself. Okay. The problem is that this kind of testing takes place where there's no physical, social, or changing environmental factors. So imagine, if this is done at the train, in the train itself, there'll be quite noisy. There might be a lot of people jostling. There might not be enough light, or there might be too bright. There might be other people calling out to the user, and also the environment might change because people are using it on a mobile phone. So that's not quite real, really. And so that one of the limitations of conducting this kind of usability testing is that we are not really taking into account the physical, social, and changing environmental factors of the user itself. So the results that we get are very much about, well, in a non-distracting situation in a room where there's good connection and there's very good lighting, no distraction, then the person can do it this way. Okay, I hope this helps, and I hope it jogs your memory about how you want to conduct usability testing. Now, there's a lot of resources again in the slide after this one. So after the usability evaluation, you need to collate and summarize the data. You need to review the data and look at, okay, what are the usability effects, okay? What can we do in terms of prioritizing the severity, and actually then start fixing stuff, okay? Usually what happens with a major usability testing at a company is that we need to then prepare a report. So you'll need to also prepare a report in this subject, but I'll talk about how you might want to prepare the report in another video. So these are some of the links to the different resources that you can read about and actually look at to remind you further about how to conduct usability testing properly. All the best.